in 1980, a film was released called Manganinnie, and you may not know of this film at all. It's an Australian film. It's based on a 1979 novel by Beth Roberts, and essentially the scene is it's in 1830 in Tasmania, which is the island at the bottom of Australia. If you take a quick look at a map of Tasmania, it used to be called Van Diemen's Land. The British colonial forces were engaged in this film at the time, in 1830. The British colonial forces were engaged in what was called the Black Line, or alternatively the Black War, which was an enforced removal of the Aboriginal people from their own lands, where their settlements were near the occupying settlements, and from the occupying forces. Now, in effect, the entire territory was under martial law. Mass killings of Aborigines were reported in what was called the Black Drive, and the Black Line was a sweep through all of the Aborigine settlements in an attempt to push them to a different part of Tasmania. But invariably, this involved killing a lot of them. It was a dreadful time in history. A lot of Tasmanian Aboriginals were killed in this movement. The film depicts a small Aboriginal tribe, which we later learn calls themselves the Singing River People, carrying about their normal lives, and in particular a woman of the tribe, Manganinnie, who is the keeper of fire. Now, she understands fire, and she always has the torch alight, which she blows on periodically. At one point, we see the British colonial forces ride through the property of Edward Waterman and his family, and the military leader tries to pressure Edward into helping their efforts, but Edward is clearly a humanist or pacifist, or at least strongly disapproves of what the colonial forces, the military, are trying to do. The forces raid the riverside tribal settlement of Manganinnie's people. Now, she's the only one to hide and escape successfully. Everyone else basically got mown over and killed or captured. The entire settlement is destroyed. Manganinnie finds her husband dead shortly afterwards. She builds a funeral pyre for him and chants a special song. Now, separate from this, and shortly later, Edward Waterman and his family are enjoying a picnic by the river. Manganinnie is watching from afar, unseen. Now, she sees the young daughter of the Watermans, Joanna, alone, playing by the river. Manganinnie blows her fire stick, which is sort of a torch, to produce smoke. Joanna sees this and is interested and approaches Manganinnie. And the two, they don't have a common language. They just don't speak each other's language. Joanna doesn't understand what Manganinnie is saying and vice versa. But for some reason, Joanna climbs on Manganinnie's back when offered a ride, and they go off together. She thinks it's just a game. Now, Manganinnie takes Joanna with her on the journey up to the mountains to find the rest of her tribe. The tribe, you see, spends part of the seasons down by the river and the other part of the year up in the mountains, where it can become quite cold and snows. Manganinnie brings Joanna a wombat to look after, which is a huge, furry, dopey animal. And Joanna, one night in the cave, they've moved into a cave, you see. Joanna, one night in the cave, draws some figures on a scrap of animal skin as they are by the fire. And the figures on the drawing include Joanna and Manganinnie and the moon that's visible outside. And Manganinnie disputes Joanna's explanation of the moon and teaches her the true Aboriginal knowledge of the moon, which involves a fish. Manganinnie teaches Joanna a lot about her Aboriginal knowledge, even though they can't really understand each other's language very well. It's a really engaging film. Now, the film didn't cover its costs initially, but then it got switched into the educational market, and it started being shown to school children in schools. And eventually, it did cover its costs. It was part of a Tasmanian film initiative, which was very short-lived. It was just this film and another film that were done under this initiative. But it's proved to be a very successful film over a very long period of time. It eventually did win a lot of awards, and it just wasn't very successful initially. You know, people in the cinemas just thought it was a little bit boring, but from an educational point of view, it's very, very interesting. And I would say it's an engaging film if you give it a chance for the slow pace. I would very much recommend it. Manganinnie, 1980. Have a good week, everyone.